Okay, great. So welcome to tonight's coloring night. I'm going to introduce Merrilee Challiss. She is a local Birmingham artist who also is an instructor in the Department of Art and Art History and is also an alum. She got her BA in Studio Arts from UAB before going off and getting her MFA in sculpture from Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art in Philadelphia. She is an accomplished artist and has received grants from the Alabama State Council on the Arts, as well as the Leeway Foundation. Additionally, she was the co-owner until its closing of the much beloved Bottle Tree Cafe, which we were talking about earlier, I'm sure we'll circle back to at some point, which is a music venue, bar, and cafe that has sadly closed, but it was very popular here in Birmingham until that point. And she was also part of Studio by the Tracks, a nonprofit art studio providing free art instruction to adults on the autism spectrum. Merrilee has shown her art throughout the Southeast and across the nation. And in her practice, Merrilee creates art that is a meditation and understanding on how everything is connected in the hopes that we will learn to live in harmony with the land, other species, and each other. I don't want to give away too much else because that's what we're here to talk about as we color. And this particular piece of art was actually in our exhibition in 2014, Interlude and Influence. So welcome, Merrilee.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Welcome, everybody.
I'm going to, whoops, what just happened? I'm going to start the PowerPoint slide. So I want to start off. We had exchanged some questions, but we can go off script wherever you would like. But I thought it would be great to kind of unpack your influences first before we get into your art first. So I'll go ahead and move to the first slide. Why don't you tell us about what influences you?
Okay, sure. So I made this PowerPoint kind of in a fugue state. So there's a lot of craziness and things I left out too. So I would say that I have very porous boundaries and am influenced by everything. And at different points in my life, I have ingested a lot of art, whether it's was living in Europe and going and seeing cathedrals and the great museums of the world, or living in Philadelphia and going to New York every other weekend and steeping myself in that world. And now sort of being kind of in a more hermetic state, living, in a more hermetic way in solitude and maybe not in a metropolis. I have turned to books and study. Especially since my business closed, I had time for these kinds of pursuits. And so that really kind of opened up my my world to pursuing ideas and knowledge, mostly about the unseen realms, the imaginal realms, all the things that are listed on the screen. So I'm just, if you know astrology, my moon is 1 degree in Gemini. So that means I'm very creatively restless. And I like to be working on a lot of different things at once. And sometimes I think that might be to my detriment, but I can't really account for it other than to say that's just how I roll. So I like to be working on paintings and maybe some sculpture and maybe some drawings and kind of just move around and try to do different things every day. So that's kind of how my practice works. But, from an early age, I was influenced by artists like Hieronymus Bosch, I think was my first big influence in high school. And then I really fell in love with Gustav Klimt and those sort of ornamental, decorative, shimmery gold canvases. And I've been influenced by so many artists. So, the list can just go on and on. But also artists that work in vernacular, like indigenous artwork too.
Which I'm assuming would lead us to this slide here. Mm-hmm. And which when you sent me this PowerPoint, I was very excited because my other master's degree is in history, and these are all things I am familiar with.
Wow. Yes, kind of, the great mysteries, the that sort of inner alchemy, that state of being, that is reflexive of, kind of when we're in a deeper state of consciousness. So that's what I think of when I think about the cave art of Chauvet Cave, and especially seeing that documentary was kind of a portal into that world of consciousness. So that's what really interests me is consciousness and why we're here. What does it all mean? What are we going to do about it? All those questions, and just, everything is so mysterious, and kind of tracking our way back to finding out what it all means, and how these, like say in the case of Hildegard von Bingen, how she was able to connect with the divine. So a lot of things that interest me are kind of, I would say Gnostic, where there's no intermediary, where it's just divine revelation. So definitely something like the Voynich manuscript, which seems like an exegesis of some kind from, we still don't know what it is really.
Yeah.
Or what, it hasn't been translated fully yet. And it's just so much fun to go down these rabbit holes and wormholes and just try to discover what it's all about. And so these slides were all kind of about touchstones of things that have artistically and just as a matter of the great mysteries like that have influenced me.
What about the colors in it too? Does that do you pull from these different illuminated manuscripts or what have you for
Yes,
your color palette?
I think so. Not when I'm working on my iPad, because those are all really psychedelic poppy colors. But yeah, I love working with inks. I've done a lot of ink drawings that were monochromatic, and I've always drawn with pen and ink, never really with any other materials. And so working with a stylus and really being vested in the mark making and has been really interesting to me. And of course I love just the imagery of say, any kind of ancient civilizations, their iconography and their symbolism. I'm really, really influenced by the symbolism and what is it encoding, and how can we understand that? So I think art making for me is a way to understand the world, right? And a way to gain knowledge and kind of process it. So I kind of work through an idea and then process it by making a piece of art about it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Here, I'll move to the next slide then. So symbols themselves are incredibly important. I'm assuming in your artwork. What draws you to certain symbols, or which symbols are you more drawn to?
Well, I drew a strange symbol from when I was about a teenager. I would draw the same thing over and over and over again. And for decades, I would draw the same symbol over and over again. And it's those kinds of things that really got me interested in investigating symbols and how they correlate across cosmologies and mythologies in different civilizations, and how they've sort of arrived to us through time. And I have this Symbols and Signs, which is a really great fold out. I brought a stack of books because I have a terrible memory for names and whatnot. So I brought a stack of books to sit next to me in case I lose my train of thought. But, just thinking about it, in this slide, there's a little image of entoptic phenomena. And the idea that there are these, if you think about consciousness being sort of a basis for everything, there are these structures that show up inside the eye that are universal, and they also show up in Paleolithic and Neolithic artwork. The spirals, that was a symbol that I was attracted to, that you find all over the world. That's definitely one. Serpents, and the symbol that I really got attached to is kind of like I saw it eventually, and it's kind of an African spider symbol. So I actually, was able to figure out what that was only after decades. So I don't know, it's just endlessly fascinating. So that's kind of where that idea comes from. And then these, you know, I went to New York to go see the Hilma af Klint show, and that was mind-blowing, and really worth the effort getting there. And I mean, I've always been influenced by Louise Bourgeois, you know, probably all the top feminine artists. I'm really into the, you know, to the artists that represent the divine feminine and kind of work with those archetypes. And I would say I threw in the El Anatsui image because I've taken, you know, what I've done over and over again when I've done sculpture, which is, you know, trying to attain to the installation, is take one thing and then attach it to something else and then attach that to something else. So it kind of relates to his process. I sewed a quilt out of postage stamps in graduate school by hand, and it took me 1.5 years. And that was one of my big projects. And I had saved all my stamps for 10 years. And so, and it was also kind of a symbolic project, just about, which seems more relevant as time goes on, because we've lost that connection to sending letters through the mail and connecting in that way. And it's also things that get thrown away, you know. So I've also worked with bras, and I sewed bras together and made another quilt. I sewed that one together by hand too. And so that materiality where you're just translating it by adding one thing and another thing, and just until it aggregates into a greater whole. And so that's kind of my connection to his work. And then I really loved Annette Messager's work when I was in grad school too. So I threw that in as well. I tried to get her to come to speak to our visiting artist program when I was in grad school, but she couldn't make it from France. You know, but there's so many other things I'm influenced by, you know, but those are, you know, some easy ones to kind of have a touchstone off of. Oh, there's a cat vomiting in the background. There we go. That's a daily occurrence. So now we know that that's over with.
So I have a question before we get into the slide. The postage stamps, those were all stamps from letters people had sent you?
Yes. Because I lived in Europe for almost 3 years. And so, and I was also a big mail art person. I did a bunch of mail art in the 90s and would send things back and forth. And so had just aggregated. For some reason, I've been I hoard strange things for decades, and then I'll make artwork out of it. So I've also, this is going to sound really creepy, but I'm just going to share with you because we're living through dark times. I've been saving my toenail clippings for over 20 years. And the reason, and I was really influenced by Tim Hawkinson. Do you know that artist?
I'm not familiar with him, no.
I saw a show of his in New York where he had taken toenail clippings and he had ground them up and made an egg out of it sounds disturbing. And he also made little creatures out of them. But that was one of his stranger pieces. So I think I was actually motivated by him to start doing that. So one day you'll see some very strange toenail clipping art.
That's really cool. So for that, let's move on then to kind of art, and you have the slide, what is art for? And oops, I did not mean to do that. I apologize. Coming back to that. I have to get this thing out of the way for me. Okay, so what is art for? And I know some of the things that we had discussed was about process, and also is there a medium that you tend to gravitate towards when if you are ever like stuck in trying to get motivated or something? I thought we could kind of hash that out here.
Yeah, I think I return to working with clay when I need a transition. It grounds me. There's nothing like squeezing some clay in your hands and making small things. And so that's what I do kind of in between projects. And I really need that tactile quality. It also is you know, when I do work with sequins, I'm using a tweezer, and so I get a carpal tunnel, and I have, you know, have to alternate hands and whatnot. But with clay, it's a very forgiving feeling. So that's probably what I do. Also drawing, too, I would say.
And you teach the 2D design, and do you also teach, is it intro to drawing?
Intro to drawing. Yeah. Hopefully some of y'all are out there.
Well, tell us your philosophy here about art, and because I know that kind of goes into also your process as well.
Well, I'm just, you know, I'm questioning. I'm questioning what is it for, and how can it be, you know, more accessible to more people, and how can more people engage in making art. You know, when we're young and we think we can't draw, it's such an imagination killer. And I'm constantly fighting against that with students. Like, no, you can draw. It just takes practice. Practice builds skill. You know, and so the idea that you're not good enough to sing, or you're not good enough to dance, or you're not talented enough, I think all that is BS. And so that's, you know, that's where I'm thinking about how we can have a broader context, and so it can be more inclusive, so we can all engage in it. You know, kind of, you know, I always feel like I'm kind of out of time. I'm not really meant for this time. I'm always kind of going back to the past, as you could see from the influences that I cited. You know, I think that we all should be living communally and having rituals and engaging in sacred dance and art. And that should just be how we should live. And so any little way we can get that back into how we're living, I think is very healing, you know, for our society. And it's been so cool and interesting to see how art is performed, especially digitally now. Like, we've all been, myself included, like, it's weird. We're socially distant, but we're all glued to a screen. And we've seen just the most amazing attempts at people, you know, recreating the historical paintings, and just like really wonderful expressions of spontaneous art making, or crafts that people have, you know, put aside for years, are now picking back up, or now they have the time to do. And so that's, you know, very heartening to me, is that people are kind of getting back into that craft skill, to engaging with that.
And has this time period, like, has it influenced any, or have you been making art during this time?
I have. I started working with some clay again because it's so calming. And I started making I've done some ink drawings, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And also been trying to teach myself to draw on my iPad, learning some new skills. So yeah, I'm doing that as well. But I'm also having days where I can't do anything. I can't stay focused like everybody else. So it's just crazy, you know. But I'm hoping, I think, and none of us really know when this is going to end. So it's very hard to kind of set goals and deadlines for yourself that are not very, you know, near future. Like, what do I want to get done tomorrow? So I would love to finish a body of work by the time this is all over, but I think that, you know, I probably should be more gentle with my goals. But yeah, I have been working somewhat consistently, but after I'm done teaching, I'll have more time probably.
So on deadlines, are you, and I'll go ahead and move to the next slide so that we have something else to look at. Do you, what I'm trying to ask is, so if you get my words through me, I'll get my words in a second. Are you like, will you book an exhibition with an idea of what you plan to do, and then make the art in the deadline for the exhibition, or do you tend to make a body of work and then go and find exhibitions?
I think I've done it both ways, but usually the way I work is there's a lot of self-sabotage. So I can't always plan what I'm going to do because I'll usually be sidetracked into changing it into something else. So, by whatever means necessary. Well, there's a couple times I've had a specific intention. I can set an intention, but I don't want to know the way to get there. Like, I think art making is about being able to surprise yourself, right? You don't want to do the same thing over and over. You want to surprise yourself. It's the joy of the finding out what's at the end of the journey, right? So part of that is not knowing how it's going to end up. That's the excitement. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I'm so attracted to. And that's why, I just enjoy kind of breaking things up. And, maybe if I was on a desert island, I would have fewer materials. I mean, that would also be, I really do like limiting the amount of materials and finding the freedom within constraints. Mm-hmm. I enjoy that as well. But I had this idea that I was going to use everything in my studio, just use it all and process it. And I make art, and then I make art out of the art that I make. So I repurpose things, and I destroy and rebuild things a lot, and take things into different iterations and different contexts. So I do a lot of using things for other purposes also.
Awesome. So this is, tell us about this one, because I also know that I remember you did a piece at the BMA where for one of the opening receptions, I can't remember which one, that was more performance sound based, which is that something that I'm not familiar that you do that a whole lot?
No, that was the first time.
Okay.
That was the first time. I kind of challenged myself. I started, I was a very fearful child. I was afraid of the dark, and I had a lot of experiences that just made me fearful. And it took me decades to kind of purge that from myself. And then finally, I was able to shift and start going towards things I was afraid of. And performance is something I've always been profoundly afraid of. When I worked at Bottle Tree, I was in the office. I didn't ever really want to be out in front. And so I'm comfortable behind the scenes or behind the bar, sort of at arm's length. And so I felt summoned to find my courage to step into that role when given the opportunity. And because I'd never done anything like that, I just had to kind of dive into the fear. And my friend Blake was willing to collaborate with me, and we created this wild piece. And, for me, it was about kind of bringing that, like you say you're about this, now go in front of people and dance and chant and sing and make a fool of yourself. And it was kind of like I was engaging, with the audience, but I was really offering prayers. And I was like, when in the world will I have the chance to do this again? So it was an amazing experience, and it was frightening and terrifying. Mm-hmm. And I can see why people who do perform, I'm sure you understand, John, like, I'm sure that at some point it must become addictive once you can get past the fear of it and you can push through that.
Yeah, it's totally true. I've played live music since I was, I think, 13. Mm-hmm. I hate band practice. I hate everything about being in a band except for the part where we actually get up on stage and play.
Yes, that's wonderful. Yeah.
But also, in my work, like before I inherited AEIVA and kind of put my art career on the side, I was starting to kind of dabble into performance a little bit in my work as well.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. It's the kind of like, it's the thing that, I know artists, art professors that even now sort of it's like the one place that's like the final frontier in terms of like being sort of accepted as like a legitimate. People roll their eyes at it faster than any other medium.
Yeah. Well, thinking about, being uncomfortable and the there's a digital media theorist named Douglas Rushkoff who has a great podcast called Team Human. And he has the phrase that art allows us to tolerate the uncomfortable, right? And that's the great power of art. And so I think, really it was after number 45 got elected that, I realized we all have to step up. We all have to step up and engage in a way that makes us uncomfortable, or nothing's going to change. And so that was the impetus for that, even though I was terrified. I was practicing, and, the idea of kind of adopting the mindset of like a spiritual warrior, thinking about Marina Abramovich or Joseph Beuys or any of those people kind of training to do performance. And I've been leading kind of collective rituals on the down low with my girlfriends for years. So it wasn't that much of but I'd never done anything out in front of people. But with other people, I'm very comfortable. Jennifer knows this. We've done, things, and that to me is so healing and whatever. But it's but yeah, it's very uncomfortable to be. I don't want to. I want to engage with other people and do collective performance with people. I think that that's something that I'd like to do more of. I've been going through menopause, so I think I'm going to wait until the hot flashes stop to do more of that.
Are you ever conscious of and I think part of the reason why people are so dismissive of performance art is because there's an equal amount of discomfort on the viewer's part in a lot of cases. Like,
absolutely.
And people just don't know what to do with it. And they feel, I feel like the one real, when we had Maria Magdalena Campos-Pone at AEIVA several years ago, and she did a performance in our lobby. And it was one of the only times, people got up and walked out like halfway through.
Yes. I had that reaction to the performance. It made me profoundly uncomfortable, and I didn't know how to enter it. And it was when I was living in Philadelphia, I actually saw Marina Abramovich do a talk. And that's sort of my entry point into that world, was getting sort of the overview of her career and all of her projects. And it was profound, it was just profound. It's like, oh, you can walk the length of the Great Wall of China. That could be a performance. There's so many, I think that art sometimes with the big A kind of has this distancing effect in the same way that someone who's owned an indie rock music venue where you have people sitting there watching music with their arms folded.
Right.
This kind of cool remove. And I think that is a disservice to everyone because you're not engaging. You're actually blocking the energy. And so the blocked energy and the non-participation and the thinking that you're too cool for school is gotten us to where we are today, so, and myself included. It's like, well, sometimes you just have to get out there and do something, So, I probably will, as I get older, engage more with performance. I also think it's, just having been a part of the class at in honors college and sort of presenting performance to students was really, really wonderful too. And to see how women, especially have kind of inhabited that role of using their bodies like over decades as a medium. And so that's something I won't say I'll do it often, but I will do it again and hopefully several more times.
Several years ago, I taught a class with Jessica Dallow at UAB as an honors program seminar all about the theory and practice of performance art. And it was a art history component. And so they had lectures during the week with Jessica, but then they also throughout the semester had to script and perform their own pieces. And then it culminated at the end where they actually had to give public performances at the Birmingham Museum. It was one of the most uncomfortable but hilarious classes I've ever taught.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Wow.
Good.
Well, but I feel like the performance art that I've really enjoyed is where the intentionality is very explicit within the art itself. Like you can see it, you can feel it, you can move through it. Mm-hmm. And then the combination, like the intentionality is just really well thought through in it. And so, yeah, that's what I unfortunately couldn't see your piece. I could hear your piece. You picked a fantastic venue to do your first one. There were so many people there.
That's why I could never do it without a mask. So I created a mask because the mask allowed me to be able to actually do the performance. I would have been too terrified otherwise. But the mask gave me power. It was my courage.
I had to get up for a second just a minute ago, but have you talked about the mask in your work just in general?
I return to the mask again and again. That's another form that I return to every now and then, maybe to, as an intermediary project. Oh, I have another funny just kind of note about that night at the performance.
Yeah.
I was there dancing, and I was also crying under the mask. Nobody could see. I was shedding tears. I was making tones, and I didn't have a microphone, but I was playing the theremin. And I look over, and my father is sitting. He's sitting with an eye in eyesight for me, and he's got his arms crossed, and he just goes,
"Oh!"
And so I knew I had done something right. Right? I was like, ah. So that was a really funny moment where my dad was just like.
That's so funny.
Yeah, it was a very powerful night. And it was, there was just so much change culturally. All the energy was so heightened. And I feel like we're going to have a lot more moments like that in our future.
Yeah, particularly after we all get out of quarantine.
Yes.
Yeah, I was really disappointed I couldn't actually see it. I tried to get close enough, but unfortunately that wasn't possible. But so being a medical campus, and then of course everything that's going on now, tell us about this installation and if you have any other things coming up as well.
Well, I had, so this project was initiated by Elizabeth Elliott, who's a curator at, well, actually she's the director now?
She's the director now, she's the director of curatorial affairs. I'm not sure if she's the director of the whole space now.
Okay, so the director of curatorial affairs at the Alabama Contemporary Art Center. And she'd invited me to do an installation at that space the year prior, and asked me to come back and do an installation with one of my old buddies, Chris Lawson, who is a fantastic artist. And we're going to do a collaborative site-specific installation dealing with the legacy of the eugenics movement in Alabama, which is a real heavy subject. And it's a very sweet, small museum that's located in a historic home. That's one of the oldest homes in Mobile, or maybe it's the oldest home in Mobile. And the cool thing about it is they have a medicinal garden that's been well established, for a long, long time. So there's, and it's beautiful too. There are palm trees and moss, and then all these medicinal plants. And they have a large collection. I can't remember how many objects, thousands and thousands of objects. And we're going to be able to use some of their collection. And they also have, and there's one example here, this large kind of cross-section anatomical model that's paper mache, and they're 6 feet tall. And so the fact that this small museum has these, they're really rare, very valuable. So it's kind of a little gem of a museum. And these other slides are in the room. It's a very small room that we're going to create this installation in. And unless anything changes, that's set for September 20th. And so we did an initial visit, and our second site visit got canceled because of COVID-19. So hopefully we'll get down there when this is all over. And we've been emailing. There's a registrar of some of the historical collections that relate to the population that was sterilized. So I'm not really sure what we're going to have access to. But that's the nature of the exhibition. to
That
sort of
sounds fascinating.
to honor their legacy and maybe tell their story.
That sounds incredibly fascinating. I really hope that you're able to do that.
Yeah.
How long will it be up once it's installed?
I think it might be up for 6 months.
Great. I have a wedding in Mobile in November, so.
I hope that we can, install it in September. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to move on then, speaking of installation. So 2 questions here. I was hoping that you'd be able to talk about the Eyes of Protection kind of piece and series that you do, because I absolutely love it. But then also, one of the other questions we had talked about earlier was, the difference as a artist in displaying at a gallery versus a museum setting as well.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So this series was started. I started making Eyes of Protection in ceramic first, as a way to kind of re-engage with clay. And this is, I guess, 2013 maybe. And then, these pieces, which are made with sequins, I started using sequins on another series and then sort of brought them over and merged those 2 things together. And these pieces were created for an installation that was at the Pizitz building. And I am a glutton for punishment, and I love very, just obsessive, compulsive, do one stitch a million times, or just add one thing a million times, do something over and over again. So that kind of process is a very meditative, going back to the idea of Hildegard von Bingen. I would be perfectly happy living in a cloister, probably making stuff with sequins all day long, if somebody was sliding some food under the door.
Which fits with your influences as well.
Right. And I have one of the books next to me of one of the Adolf Wuffli. Do you guys know his work? He's one of the visionary artists that I love. I'll just kind of show this very quickly too. But I think he might have lived in an institution and people just kept giving him colored pencils and feeding him. And I was like, yeah, I would love to live in an art sanctuary. Here's just, I guess, that book, Adolf Wuffli. Check him out. So think, as someone who's always kind of dabbled and never really been able to attain meditation practice, but always want to, kind of in an aspirational sense, this process is so laborious. And also, what is that lady's name? Liza Liu, who does the seed bead environments, those artist built environments. I can't remember her name. I think it's Liza Liu. But I just really, really loved working. Let me back up for a second. So, I'd spent some time in Greece and Turkey, and so I'd seen a lot of the evil eyes and was, of course, enchanted by them, literally. And so that's where the genesis or origin for that symbol was for me. And I've always drawn eyes in all of my artwork, and as someone who has a little bit of the pareidolia, I think it's called, where you see things and other things. I always see things and other things too, and see things staring back at me. And so through doing these pieces, I was able to kind of focus my attention, not immediately, but after a while, kind of slow down and take a breath. And then you have that opportunity when you're picking up the sequin with the tweezers to say a prayer, right? Because it's just one motion over and over again. And so I started trying to challenge myself to kind of make my work a more meditative practice. And so this is the result of that. And I had also done this with doing the sequin deer, the spirit animal taxidermy. So it kind of started there. But when you're doing one thing over and over again, it's often helpful to get the most out of whatever time you're spending. I'm somebody that does yoga with a cat toy wrapped around my toes. I'm doing two things at once. So I'm like, I'm going to make art and make my art more like a meditative shamanic practice. So kind of merge those things. So it was kind of the merging of those things that, to calm my mind, to sort of just for my own mental health and well-being. And the sequin is a single point of light. So it also goes back to this idea of consciousness, and it's reflective, and it's bringing light into the world, and it's reflecting back. Like whatever you're bringing to it, it's pushing back at you. And so the inclusion of mirrors and shiny objects and glitter, because we need this in our life. We need sparkle and joy. We need these things. And also the idea of the sequins looking like scales, and thinking about them being a cladding or protection too, where they look metallic for all intents and purposes. And so all of those things are sort of filtering into the ideas around those pieces.
And what I like too is it's a cultural symbol that doesn't stay within one culture. Like, yeah, we see it a lot in the Mediterranean area, of course, because that's probably a little bit where it originates, but you see the eye popping up in all different religions, and it tends to mean or symbolize very similar things too.
Right.
Which is what drew it to me. And I saw it at the Vinegar Project, the Airbnb house.
Mm-hmm.
So this is for the people that are joining us that are not in the area, or if you hadn't heard about it yet, there's a gallery in town that's not just like they have a gallery itself. Yeah, John's got the shirt on. But they also have art installations in an Airbnb downtown, which is it's crazy, really cool. What was that experience like?
It was really cool. It's literally less than a block from where I live, so that was convenient, and it was a very novel idea. It was a very posh Airbnb, and it was cool because people came out to check it out, and it was interesting to install in that context for sure, because I also did an iteration of an installation in a closet. And Vinegar's been a great organization to kind of land on the scene with lots of energy. They're female fronted, and they're fiery, and very smart, and also very community oriented. So it's just been a pleasure to work with them. And kind of going back to the second part of your question, I've been making work and showing in a lot of different contexts for, I guess, I don't know, for decades. And I've shown in galleries, an art center, will soon be a medical museum. And I've also done things on the sidewalk, right? So I have probably a full range of experience. And, there was a slide that showed the book, The Gift, which I had come across. I think it was from a podcast by the Jealous curator. I'm pretty sure that's who it was. And she introduced me to that book. And I'm losing my train of thought. What it was? I remember in that podcast she mentioned, and this kind of caught my attention. She said, when you're an artist and you're installing in a museum, she said, you may be the only person who's not paid that day. And I was like, oh, that's so strange to think about. But, I myself, if I'm going to install in a gallery, or, in cases where I've just, say last year, traveled across the country to be in a show in Seattle, all of that expense is on you. And so this idea of the Lewis Hyde book, The Gift, which I would definitely recommend, sort of questions these assumptions that we make about how artists are treated. And, we're cultural workers. And I think that now, there's this new sense of reevaluating what the artist's place is, what the artist's role is, and trying to get more respect, I guess, or even just minimum wage, just some payment, for installing and doing, kind of in just, I don't know. But saying that, my experience with Vinegar, they kind of shook everything up, and they said, no, we're going to pay artists to install. And that was the first time I had ever been paid to install. It was amazing. And so, you know, with these very, very contemporary and very visionary oriented women, they're thinking about these kinds of concerns, which I think is the next, wherever we go from here, which I don't think we're going to go back to normal. I think that that's gone. You know, there's like an invitation in this space that's open now for us to re-envision how we want to go forward in a way that is like, where there's more equality, you know, where there's more, I don't know, just
intentionality.
Yeah, all of that. So that was a really good experience, and my jaw dropped when she was like, no, we're paying you for installing. So kudos to them. That was really incredible. But, you know, there are just so many, I would say, for anybody that's, you know, younger and starting out, I would say yes to whatever you think you can handle, and you'll learn from all of your varied experiences, and try different things, you know. Apply. And I'm saying this for myself too, which I don't do enough of. When I lived in Philadelphia, I worked for 4 different artists as their office assistants. Osvaldo Romberg, Tom Judd, and then Jack and Trish, and I can't remember their last names. But, you know, this woman, Trish, was a painter, and she applied for this grant for 13 years, never got it. The 14th year, she got it. You know, so that kind of tenacity is required, right? You can't ever give up, right? You have to just keep going and keep applying, and just know that, you know, if you're a woman, you might be, you know, one of my advisors in grad school was Catherine Bradford, and her paintings, now she's in her 70s, have become incredibly valuable. You know, so it might take you until your 70s to have value established on your work like that, but you just can't stop. So you just can't ever stop.
I will concur with you on that. Like, the one common thread that I see in most artists who are successful, you know, it's not even that their work is that much better than any other artist. It's just the one thing they all have in common is they just never stop doing it.
Yeah. And, you know, and for most people, you can't stop. You know, if you're making art, you kind of, in a way that is about I think being an artist is about investing in your own individual, in your relationship with your own imagination. And so that's, you know, that has nothing to do with time or age. It's just an ongoing process. And that's kind of the idea of the alchemy. Like, when you are making art, you are engaging with forces and manifesting them. It's magical. You have an idea, it doesn't exist. And then all of a sudden you make something and there's something there. Like, that is true magic. And so this idea that you're constantly remaking yourself into, you know, from lead into gold. But yeah, and I have so many talented students, and I only had a couple slides that I had ready to throw in here, but this is some of the student work for sure. This is from my 2D design class, so some of them may be on here as well. I'm not really sure. And I also have beautiful drawings from my other class as well. I just didn't have them ready to go.
Well, I wanted to kind of flip. This was the last slide on there. We are a couple of minutes left. So I wanted to make sure, I can't see the chat, guys. Are there any questions?
No questions in the chat right now.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask? And go ahead and unmute. Well, thank you, Merrilee. I'm going to stop my screen share, and as we do before we end all of these, if you guys would like to show us what you've done and hold it up to the screen, we'll do a screenshot in a bit, and afterwards, once they're all up there.
Very cool.
Yay!
Nice.
Awesome. This is so cool. Oh, the bird.
Yay! Oh, so awesome. Well, thank you guys, and thank you, Merrilee, so much for coming on and talking with us. I really appreciate it. And before everyone kind of leaves out, if you are not here in Birmingham, if you wouldn't mind just typing in the chat what state you're in or where else you are, we would love to know. And thank you guys, and I hope to see you all back next week for Steve's. If you are not done with your coloring like me, go ahead and finish. Be sure to tag us on Instagram and Facebook. Our handle is at AEIVA, AEIVA UAB. So AEIVA UAB is our Instagram. Be sure to tag us or find us on Facebook, and we will share these on there as well. So thank you guys, and thank you, Merrilee.
Thank you.
I hope to see you all back next week with Steve.
All right, bye-bye.